we are going to work with. So you see, this is what we had in the last session, right? Test field lesson, and we reached this side where we were showing the password and all that, right? Now let's try to get into the game of let's say we are not going to use password. All right, let's just try to enter just okay. I think we should start from password. Let's start from wherever we are right now. We want to put a button below this thing, right? Below this thing, so that at the end of the day, everything will be arranged in such a way that when we press the button, then the message shows somewhere like that, right? So let's get the listen. Let me go to so what we need to do is to put a button. All right, now we just enter one thing. We are just entering just one thing, right? What did we center? We just center text field, only a single text field. But right now, let's put the text field in a column, right? So let's not just have a text field, but everything should be in a column. Let's wrap it with column, right? Now, a text field is one component of this column, right? So this is the column. This is the column. Now the children. A column has children. A row has children. We talk about that. So the first component of it is going to be this text field, right? Let me label it. This is a comment. The the original text field. Let me lower this thing down so that it doesn't worry as much. And let me close this and increase the font so that we can see. So the original text field is the one here, right? So immediately after the text field, I'm going to put button here, right? Button to press. So the button that we are going to use an elevator button. So elevated button, which is here, right? On pressed function and all that will also come. We've worked with this already. So let me just expand it for so that the things after that we put a comma, right? After each widget, make sure you put a comma below that. After that, so on press, right? So I'm going to put just basically put a simple function here, right? And then the child for this is going to be a test, right? So the button is going to have a test on it. So let's call it get results, basically, right? Let's refresh this and see what we'll have. Okay, so right now it's a column and everything is in the middle. It's right now at the top. I want to push everything to the top, right? So right now let's try to eliminate this center because it's basically not doing us good, which is let's try to eliminate this column. So we go here, scroll down, we go to remove this widget, we remove it. Then for the column, we are going to center everything. So let's say main axis alignment, main axis alignment. So it's main axis alignment dot center. Basically, let's see the effect. Yeah. So for the column, this here there's a column here. Inside it, we are just arranging everything in column, like in the center. So now get result. Let's press on that. Nothing is happening now. Why? Because in the chart, in the elevator button that we have here, there is nothing happening now here. So what we want to do is that after we press this button, we want to see the result out. Whatever the user will print here, we want to see it printed in our um, terminal here. We want to see it here in our terminal. But then currently nothing is happening inside. So how do we print something? We say inside we have debug print. This is what we say we should be using when it comes to this, right? So we need to add something. So button press, right? So let me do so let me press this. You can see button press has shown in the terminal here. Press again. The button pressed has also come. But then we have to know what we want. Whatever the user will enter here, right now if I enter something, and I press the button. I want to be able to fetch that value. We want to be able to work with that value. Right? We need to take this value outside. Whatever the user entered here, we need to start working with it. Right? Let's take it out and work with it. But how do we get that out? Right now, we are just having the test field. Look, we just have the test field here. The test field here from here to here, right? But we need to get whatever the user will enter in this field outside. Are we still working with password? Let's know. Yeah. So okay. So enter some data. Let's just call it enter some data, right? So I'm going to read that so that it's not really about that. Okay, enter some data. So if we enter the data, whatever we enter, we want to, when we print it, we don't want to see button pressed, right? We need to get the data from here. But how do we work with that? That's what we are coming to actually learn. Now, to be able to work with that around every test field, for us to get the data that you are having, we need to put a controller in the test field. A test field is missing a particular key element called a controller, a variable, and that variable is the one that is going to be collecting the data. It is going to be the one collecting the data. It's going to serve as the brain, right now we are testing it. We are typing, but it is just in the field. We can see it, but then there's nothing behind the scene collecting the data so that we can refer to that particular thing and take the data elsewhere and work with whatever the user has entered. Right now it's just a show that we are having here. Right, I think I made a mistake here. So yeah, so that's what we have right now. I want to enter here, right? So nothing here, I print here, nothing is showing. So now we need to add a controller to everything in the test field, right? One of the arguments in the test, remember, it is at the test field side, not at the decoration side, right? So we have something called controller. I'm using capital letters. So controller. um so we will put a controller here, right? Something, then there should be a comma. But then this is not what we are going to. We are coming to put a controller variable here, right? Controller variable is the one we are going to pass here. But then how do we put that? So you have to go and create the controller somewhere else so that you can use it inside the test field, right? This test field is going to be just for maybe, so every test field should have a controller, and each controller should be a different brain for each. So we need to go to here. Look at where I'm going to the top. This is the build, right? This is the build function, right? Inside the build, just on top of it, there is a override, right? So here you open this just on top of this region on top of the override for the build. There's override here on top of the build. In the region above it is where we declare variables that you need to set ahead of time. So to do that, then that one we are going to call final text editing controller, right? So we are going to call it data controller. This is the name of the controller we are having, equals to text editing controller. Then we close the bracket here now, like this. So this is what we have. So we have a controller. So let me give a comment. Controller for our test field. So you see, we want to create a variable here, right? The kind of object is a text editing controller. That's how it's supposed to be. And it's a final. We'll talk about final and constant, but it should be a final. And then this one is going to be for that particular test field. If you have another test field for password, another test field for email, another test field for phone number, each of them should have their own controllers. So you have to come to the top here, define them before you go and use them somewhere. So we are going back here against the controller in the test field. That's when we are going to put some data controller. This is what we created right now. This is what we created right now, right? So now this one works. So let me refresh this thing. You can see now that like press this button press still come, right? Now the controller is ready. Whatever will enter, right? If I enter anything inside, we need to be able to see it. So let me go to, we are going back to the debug pressing here, right? We are going to create a variable, and that variable is going to, let's say, final um results, right? So let's say that's the result of the results. That's what we are going to print. I mean, then we are going to call the controller that we have some data controller, because that is where the data will be. That is where the data will be. But then you have to dot trim dot test is test dot trim. Okay, I will explain that soon. So now what we are having from here, whatever is the some data controller, what we are doing is not really going to give you the, it's like an object around the whole thing. Whatever you are going to collect is going to, this particular controller is going to collect everything that the user will put in. Inside this controller, there is something, there's a method, a field called test. That is where the actual data reside inside the controller. So a controller is an object that collects anything that um, the user will be entering. Now, when you collect it, there's a particular field inside this controller called test, and that is what we are going to focus on to get, right? So here, dot test. No, we don't need a comma. So this is the test. It's going to collect the test for us. Now we are going to print that. So we say the user entered, then we are going to put that inside. We remember we use a dollar sign and then we call the results, right? Result variable. The result variable is the one we have here, right? That's what I'm just calling inside, right? I call it inside so that we can print it in our terminal. So the back print is printing everything on the terminal that we learned about this already, right? So now the test, there's the test, meaning that when we take the controller will be collecting everything will be inside. When we take the controller, we are going to get the test from the controller. That's what we are basically doing here, right? When we get that test, we are putting it inside this result variable. That's what equal to, we are building into this result variable. Now with this result, we can do anything with it. Right now, we are just printing it inside there nicely, right? So now let's refresh this and see what happens. Okay, so I have here, let me print this, right? The user entered, nothing has come because we haven't entered anything. So right, let me enter some random value. It's up to 5, right? We limited it to 5. So I mean press enter. You see that the users entered this, right? Because that's what I put inside, and then it's showing here, right? That's what shows. That's the way we can use this particular value, right? So I can print it again, the same thing. Let me go and even stop the limit, right? I don't want this limit to be on it, so I'm going to remove the limit. I commented it out, right? So then let's refresh, restart. Everything is fresh now. In print, nothing entered, right? So let me go to, I'm just entering something that get the result. See the result, the user entered this. So you can see that the controller that we have, that controller that we created here, let me go back, on top of the override. See, there are two things here. I'm not talking about this override, I'm talking about the override that on top of the build function. This is the build function, the override, right? Just in that space between it and the name of the class here, and this space between it is where you put your controllers, right? So this controller is a test editing controller. It should be final test editing controller, and this is the actual name of the controller. This one is the data type. We talk about data. This is the data type of this variable. These are our actual variable. You can change to whatever you want to, and then it needs to be initiated with the objects, right? The object creation test editing controller, right? These things are inside Flutter. They come with Flutter. Right? These are classes that are built already inside it. So we are using it. So now with that data controller now, once it's ready, we go and give it to the appropriate test field. The test field that we have here. So inside the test field, we are adding that controller against then controller argument inside the text field. Then we came and add it here so that this controller, whatever the user will enter here, this controller will be collecting it. After we collect it, we can use that result anywhere else. So now this is what we are doing. When the user presses it, we are fetching the text from that controller because we assume the user will enter something, right? Then pressing the text, and that text will be the one go like here, right? And then we'll get the text and put it into our result variable, and I will be printing the result variable right now, right? So yeah, so basically, yeah, that's what, wow, that's what happens here now. Yeah, so that's how we can fetch the variable, and we can do anything with it. We can check if it is correct. We can do all those checks and things on them. But right now we got to understand the use of the controllers, right? Yep. So yeah, that's about controllers. If you add more, another test field, you need to create another controller for it, add it to that controller, and be able to use the results. Without controllers, you can have test fields, but you cannot use the result. You need a controller to be able to capture whatever the user entered, and then from that capturing, from that controller, you can do whatever you want to do in the app. That's how you collect. You actually collect the user inputs. So we'll look at the other stuff, but then this is very, there's a little problem, something called memory leak. Memory leak. So when you are able to enter this, right, the user will be navigating to other screens. But on your machine, in your memory, this particular data that the user just gave right now, we may not need, we just need this on this page or something. If you don't know, if you're not careful, this particular variable will be created, this text will be put on your memory, right? On your memory all the time, right? When you come and use it again, it will create another space on your memory and use it, and then it will create another space on your memory, and then be able to, it will be filling all your memory space, right? And your app may crash with time, right? Because you didn't keep something in mind. Whenever we are done with that particular data input, we need to dispose the value from memory, right? There won't be any memory leak, right? So that we have used it. So when we are done using it, we need to dispose it, clear it out. If not, it will stay in our memory and cause memory leak, and then the app may crash along the way. How do we do that? So you need to go to, so all your controller, make sure that in your controller this thing, you have to come to the top here, right? The top, on top of the build, we are going to introduce something called override. Another override, so, right? There's one override that comes by default, right? That comes by default, which is the one on top of the build. But there are other overrides that we need to do, right? So this override that we have is going to be void dispose, right? And then it's like a function. Then we open it. Now, so what are we disposing? We need to dispose whatever we have here, whatever we are, the controller. So we do some data controller dot dispose. That's what this is, and then you do super dot dispose. Super dot dispose is needed. This is compulsory to be put there, right? So make sure that it comes after your all your disposal, right? You dispose your stuff first before you do the super dot dispose. Super dot dispose should always count. So this is how you create a simple override, so that whenever we are done from this field, right, from this particular screen, right, the controller, the screen should be able to remember to dispose that from our memory, so that there won't be any memory leak. So when you do a controller, these are the things to keep in mind. Always, when you create a controller, you give it to a particular text field. Remember to add a dispose override. You do a dispose override, and any controller that you have, you may have another controller called password controller, email controller, phone number controller, first name controller. All those controllers, make sure you dispose all of them. You put all of them in the dispose, so that they are off your memory. You keep your memory space in mind, right, when you are creating. So you do that. So that's what we need for this thing.